Good evening. As we are continuing working our way through the Old Testament, as you have noted, there are going to be times where we're going to kind of really slow things down quite a bit. And then there are times where we're speeding things up and covering a lot more information, or at least taking big leaps before we get to a point where we are taking or slowing things down a little bit. We've noticed that as really we only gave Solomon really just 1 week, just one lesson to look at his importance, as he's the one who he stands out because he did what? All right, he built the temple. And so that's huge. That is a massive part of Israelites' history. At the same time, who was really responsible for the temple build? Yeah, his son, David. David's the one who said, I want to do this. He's the one that if you read through and you look, he does all kinds of preparations for building that temple. And so, David does that and does all the preparation so that his son is able to then build the temple. So, as we come into Solomon, we really didn't spend a whole lot of time other than to focus on the building of the temple, to demonstrate that how did God show that he was with them when they built the temple? Okay, very good. There was the cloud that came down, and the cloud filled the temple with the glory of the Lord. And that was the same way that God demonstrated that he was with them when? Okay, when they built the tabernacle back in Exodus. So Exodus chapter 40, you had the same cloud that comes down and fills the temple. Solomon then ranks as one of the great kings of Israel who never makes any mistakes, right? What does Solomon do? Yeah, you go back and you look in Deuteronomy chapter 17, and there are basically 3 things that they're told when you have a king, the king is not to do these 3 things. What are they? Okay, and in particular, to amass many wives, much gold for whom? For himself, and the horses and chariots, in particular, horses from where? From Egypt. So, do those 3 things sound familiar as far as Solomon's concerned? Do you think God is happy with this? Not at all, especially with the foreign wives. What did they accomplish? Okay, they turned his heart away from the Lord because he began to set up places that were devoted to the gods of his wives. And he began to join in with the worship of these gods. Did he ever stop worshiping Yahweh? No, he continued to, but his heart was not wholly, completely, fully devoted to the Lord his God as his father David had been. So, as we continue in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9, this should be what we are anticipating, what we're expecting. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9, the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. All right, so verse 14. This is language that should sound familiar. Words, phrases, things that when you read it, you should have some spidey sense that's starting to tingle a little bit. Verse 14, what does it say? The Lord what? What was that, Connie? All right, the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon. Why would that sound familiar? This is the time frame of the judges. This is the language of the judges when the people failed and went out into idolatry, and the Lord would raise up an oppressor, an adversary against them. It's the exact same language. This is what the Lord is now doing against Solomon. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these details, but I am going to move forward, and I'm going to go to verse 26. 26, we're introduced to this guy. There is Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. Now, that's just an introductory statement. He says, now let me tell you the story, is the way this is. It's not that he rebelled against the king and then all these things happened. He's just saying, I'm going to tell you the story now about the uprising of a guy named Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Now, this guy, he's called a servant of Solomon, a servant of the king. But as we've seen before, he's just talking about, I think, warfare. This guy is one of his lead general type of people. So let's start in verse 29. At that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him on the road. Now Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them were alone in the open country. Then Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him, tore it into 12 pieces, and he said to Jeroboam, take for yourself 10 pieces. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon and will give you 10 tribes. But he will keep one back for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me and worshiped the Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, keeping my statutes and my rules, as who did? David, his father. So once again, you have this comparison. So he sends Ahijah, and you have this, continue, verse 34, nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him a ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, give it to you, 10 tribes, yet to his son I will give 1 tribe, that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I've chosen to put my name. All right, so let's make sure we're understanding the setting. This is the story about whom? All right, this is the story about a guy named Jeroboam. And what is Jeroboam going to do? Okay. Which is what? All right, he's going to lead a rebellion against the house of David. That is Solomon's house. So, this is how it begins. Jeroboam. Who came to Jeroboam? Ahijah. Well, that seems weird. Why not Nathan? Is it Nathan the prophet? Yeah, all right. So Isaac put it pretty bluntly, Nathan probably died. Yeah, we could say, why not Samuel, right? We're not given the stories of these prophets. All we know is that God seems to have prophets provided for them. And it was Samuel to Saul and David, Nathan also was one who came to David and Solomon, if I recall. But now you have Ahijah is the prophet that God is sending. And so he sends Ahijah, and you have something that's, it's going to be a very, very common way for prophets to give their messages. We would call this what kind of a prophecy? What does Ahijah do? Does he just come to him and say, hey, Jeroboam, come here, I got something to tell you? What does he do? Yeah, he's wearing a specific garment, and he comes up to Jeroboam, and he takes the garment, and he does what? He rips it up into a bunch of pieces. That seems weird, doesn't it? Couldn't he have just simply gone to Jeroboam and said, hey, I've got a message from the Lord, and here it is? Couldn't he have just done that? Sure, but this is one of the things that you find. God likes to send people with object lessons or object prophecies. These are objects that are used so that they can visually make some kind of connection with the point that is being made. Whether it be this garment that gets ripped into a bunch of pieces, whether it be Ezekiel, who, remember, had to lie down on his side and basically play with toys for over a year, as the case was for everyone to watch and see. And whether it's Jeremiah, who has to go to a potter's place and watch it, the pottery being made and all of this, and then buy the field. There's all kinds of object lessons. And why go to all the trouble to do that? Okay, Joshua says it's because the Lord asked, sure. Why else, though? They're memorable, right? It's not every day that you see maybe on a Sunday a guy get up and rip his jacket off and throw it across the church building and put another one on, right? Does that happen all the time? What, Olivia, have you ever seen that? Oh, this morning. Okay, I didn't tear it to pieces. That is accurate. I did not rip it into pieces. Yes. Yeah, and then I put another one on. That's an object lesson. It's a way to have people connect visually to the point that is trying to be made. God uses these with the prophets a lot. And that's what he's doing right here as he sends Ahijah with this garment and has him rip it up. And then what does he do? He hands 10 of the pieces and says to Jeroboam, here you go. You are going to control 10 of the tribes. You will be their leader. Why not all of them? All right. Isaac said, so that David will still have his everlasting dynasty. Where was that promised? All right, 2 Samuel chapter 7. Remember, we go back there. That's one of the 5 key passages of the Old Testament. It's number 4, in which the prophecy gets narrowed down to one family. That is the Davidic line. So this is the Davidic covenant that's made. And God says, I'm going to be faithful to that covenant, to that promise that I made. And that line is going to endure. But I am going to rip part of the nation away and give it to Jeroboam. Any questions on any of that? Yes. What did Jeroboam say? Let's see here. So, what it says in verse 39, this is where it ends. God says, I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. Verse 40, therefore Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam. So, what did Jeroboam say? We have no idea. We don't know exactly how he responded, but what do we know? Yeah, Bruce?
It did not make Solomon happy.
Okay, you want to say it again? The mic's there.
Whatever Jeroboam said, it did not make Solomon happy.
Okay, and it really is not based on what Jeroboam said. It's really based upon what who said?
Well, Solomon wanted to kill Jeroboam.
Right, but it's based on what Ahijah said to Jeroboam, right? What we know is, does this just simply remain private between Ahijah and Jeroboam? No. Somehow word gets out. We're not given the details. We're not told how it all gets promulgated, but all we do know is as soon as this comes out, why does Solomon want to kill Jeroboam if a prophet of God is the one who said this? Okay, because he knows that Jeroboam is going to take what he has. But if this is of the Lord, then why would he have a problem with that? Okay, why did Saul try to kill David? I don't know what the last bit you said was. All right, when it was said by a prophet that he would be king. Now, I think that you could make a good case that maybe he didn't know that had been said, very potentially. But Saul did see the writing on the wall, if nothing else, right? Isn't that what he tells his son Jonathan at some point that says, don't you see that he's going to take your kingdom from you? There's a sense. Do we get the sense from Solomon that the most important thing in his life is following and pleasing God? Yeah, anybody, just like, and I think Saul is a good example, who has tasted the seat of power, like most people, doesn't want to give that up and doesn't want to see that taken away in any way, shape, or form. So Solomon seeks to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam does what? He has to flee to Egypt. Jeroboam finds himself needing to go to Egypt in order to survive. Have we seen this one before? Yeah. Tell me, where have we seen this before? In the Bible, okay. Isaac, where have we seen this before? Hold on, the mic's coming up. We'll wait for the mic to get here. All right, go ahead.
In chapter 11, verse 18.
Chapter 11, verse 18. Okay.
1 Kings.
So that is at least down there, talking about the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so, yeah, this is in a lot of that stuff that we skipped over, the problems that cropped up for him. But very specifically, I'm wanting to broaden this outside of the Solomon story. Where have we seen people who have had to basically flee or go to Egypt in order to be saved? Yeah, Kelly?
Isaac had to take his family down there. I think it was Isaac. Jake. Joseph's parents.
Yeah,
Joseph's
okay.
dad. That one.
Okay.
Had to take his family down there. And then later we see Joseph, the father of Jesus, taking.
Well, we're not
Jesus.
worried about that yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, from what we've already seen, right? So, does this not fit to some degree the Joseph narrative where Joseph goes down to Egypt, but eventually his entire family joins him, comes down. Jacob brings his family. Really, Judah is the one who brings the family down into Egypt so they can be saved. All right? Have we seen it elsewhere? I think that's the greatest example. Yeah, what about Genesis chapter 12, when Abraham takes his family down to Egypt because of the famine that was in the land. And so they go down there, and a lot of that is not necessarily great, but what I think we're supposed to begin to see is some type of story repetition, where the narrative is following patterns that have already been established, whether it be with the patriarchs that we saw, or here, where he has to flee down into Egypt in order to be saved. And really, all of this is ultimately, I told Kelly, yeah, we're not dealing with that yet, but I hope what you see is, as we see these intercontextuality, you know, the stories that kind of get repeated, the textual stories that kind of get overlaid on top of each other over and over again, where's it leading to? If you remember what Kelly said just a second ago. Kelly, where's it leading to?
Joseph takes Jesus and Mary to Egypt to get away from the king, the Herod.
Yeah. When you have an overbearing king who wants to kill the future king that the prophet has announced, and he has to flee to Egypt to find solitude in Egypt until what point? Until the king has died, and then he can return and fulfill at that point the destiny that he is supposed to fulfill. Does this story sound familiar? It's supposed to. It's these layers of the stories over and over again that lead us to and bring us to Jesus in the ultimate one. That's why remember, Matthew is the one recording this, and he says that he had to go down into Egypt and come out so that what could be fulfilled? So the prophecy could be fulfilled. Which one? Yeah, out of Egypt I've called my son, right? Which, by the way, we'll talk about this eventually, is not a prophecy about Jesus. It's actually a statement about Israel. And Israel coming out of Egypt during the Exodus. It comes from Hosea. And Hosea is talking about Israel coming out of Egypt when they say that. Yeah, Jan? Okay, give me 1 second so he's coming with the mic. So, all right, now we're good.
Also, Egypt, it's interesting, he went there to be saved, but that's also the place where the firstborn were killed, and they left Egypt.
Yes.
But anyway, just kind of the opposite.
Yeah, and I think you see a lot of those, thematic, it's almost inversions to some degree, the way that the stories work. But then there's these slight differences that you see from here to there, inversions of the opposites. Whereas, you were pointing out the firstborn, talking about in Egypt, the death of the firstborn and all of that. So yeah, there's so many interesting little layers, nuances, things that you can pull out. But it's important that we see the story gets repeated, and it's meant to be that way. We're supposed to see the layers that as we read this story, and I think that's what Matthew means when he calls Hosea's statement, "Out of Egypt I called my son," he calls it a prophecy. But it's not a prophecy the way we think about it. Hosea was not saying that looking forward to Jesus and saying, well, one day God's going to call Jesus out. I don't think when he wrote that down, he had any thought of a future son coming out of Egypt at all. He's simply talking about God calling his son Israel out of Egypt. But Matthew is saying this is the way we're supposed to read it. That all of these stories that get repeated in their various forms, all of them work together so that, when Abraham goes down into Egypt, or when Jacob and his family goes down into Egypt, or right here, when Jeroboam goes down into Egypt, all of these are stories that are pointing forward. And everything about these stories are things that are pointing forward and looking forward towards the fulfillment to come. Does that make sense? That picture, that idea? Are there any questions about that? So, does it make sense when I say when Hosea says that, he's not thinking about Jesus, even though Matthew says that he is? Do you understand why I'm making that distinction? We're good? Okay. All right. I'm sure we'll spend more time on that at some point. But this is the connection. Jeroboam rose and went to Egypt, to Shishak, the king of Egypt, and he was there until what point? All right, until the monarch who wanted him dead had himself died. And this is now, in this story, I mean, we're looking at the tragedy of Israel to some degree. This is the beginning of the split. This is the rise of Jeroboam and everything that's going to happen. And this is the final statement about Solomon. It's in the midst of this that you get Solomon's epilogue, the final words about him that are so common for all the kings. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father. And who now becomes king? All right, now we have Rehoboam. So we have now Jeroboam and Rehoboam, who are the two kings. So Rehoboam goes, chapter 12, goes to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him the king. And as soon as, who heard about this? All right, as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, because he was still where? All right, he's still in Egypt. He returns from Egypt, and they called him and Jeroboam and all the assembly, and they came to Rehoboam, and they said, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you." So Rehoboam said to them, "Go away for 3 days and come again to me." So the people went away. All right. I'm going to assume that most of us are fairly familiar with this story. This is one of those that gets talked about, I think, a little more, and there's a lot of really good lessons in this. But did anything jump out at you about Jeroboam here in that little bit I just read? Hold on, Joshua. Let's see what someone else thinks here. Was there anything interesting about Jeroboam? That's fair. All right. She said no, in case y'all were wondering. So, Everest doesn't find it interesting, but I do. So, anybody able to read my mind on what I find interesting? Yeah, Julia? Okay, say that again in about 3 seconds. 2, 1, go.
It seems like he's submitting himself along with the people to Rehoboam.
Yeah. Does Jeroboam show up at Shechem and say, surprise! There's a new king on the block, guys. Y'all are going after him, but I got 10 pieces of cloth right here that says it's mine. Does he say that? No. He comes, he and everybody else, they go to Rehoboam and they say, hey, buddy, we can make this work. All you have to do is what? Just don't be a jerk like your dad was. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. Lighten the load. He had all kinds of building projects, and we were completely overburdened with him, which is so surprising when the wealth that came in should have been so much so that everybody was just living it up completely, right? I mean, he made it to where people, we might say today, people didn't even care about, pennies anymore, although we might say today people didn't even care about, $100 bills anymore. They were nothing because of all the wealth that was floating around. That's, for them, no one even cared about silver anymore. What's silver? Who cares about silver? Even in the midst of that, the yoke, the burden on these people was so great that when they came up to his son and they actually said to him, hey, before we put this crown on your head, we need a promise from you that you're going to be different from your father in this very specific way. And to his credit, what does Rehoboam not immediately do? Immediately, he doesn't just say, you kidding? Whatever. I don't have anything to do with you. Get out of here. No. He says, you know what? Let me think about it. Give me 3 days. So, in this time, King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father when he was yet living, which, by the way, what do we know about Solomon? There's a lot of things, but what one thing stands out? His wisdom, right? Isaac said he was very wise. His wisdom. These are the guys that counseled the wisest person on earth. You think they may have a little sense between them? Quite possibly. These are the ones that Solomon chose to be his counselors. And so I think it's smart. This shows a lot of wisdom on Rehoboam's part, doesn't it? I'm going to seek out advice. Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the guys that advised my father. So he took counsel with these old men. And he says, what do you think I should say to the people? And how do they answer? All right. They give wise counsel, don't they? They give wise counsel. If you will be a servant to the people and serve them, speak good words to them, when you answer them, they will be your servants forever. In other words, servant leadership, right? Is that a good idea? The leaders serve the ones that are serving them, put the whole model on its end, and you be there for them. Listen to them. Do what they say. They said, if you do that, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. If you will just simply listen to them. And I tell you what, this could be a really good story and really powerful lesson on seeking out wise counsel, listening to wise counsel, and the positive effects of it if what had happened. If he'd stopped right there and said, all right, I don't even need 3 days. Just bring everyone together. This makes a whole lot of sense. Is that what he does? No, verse 8, but he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men who'd grown up with him, and stood before him. And he said to them, "What do you advise that we answer the people who've said to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" And the young men who'd grown up with him said, "Thus you shall speak to the people who said to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us.' You shall say to them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. Now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions." Let's see here. I'm just going to... So, the CSB, "My little finger is thicker than my father's waist," right there. I don't want to get into it, but just note, I think they're being very crude with this statement, and I'll let you take that for what it is. But it's my little finger. You want to know how much of a man I am compared to my father? Yeah, my little finger is bigger than my father's midsection. You think my father was bad? Wait till you get a load of me. That's what they're saying. Which, when he responds to them, he wisely leaves that little tidbit out. But he does, though, use the wording that they use. My father used what? Very good, Joshua. My father used whips. You think that was bad? I'm going to use scorpions. You thought my father's bad? It's going to be a whole lot worse if you cross me. And the idea behind this, what they're saying, right from the very get-go, they're testing you. Let me put it this way. Kelly, when you start a year as a teacher, generally speaking, in the first week, are you more rigid with them than you are in the final week? He's nodding yes. Explain why, please. I'm putting him on the spot. I should have asked him to explain this, beforehand, so he had a good answer. But we'll see how
It's way easier to loosen up later than to get control back after you've lost it.
All right. So, in other words, what are the kids going to try to do in the beginning?
See what they can get away with.
See what they can get away with. Yeah. And I'm sure you've got stories. I know Bruce has done a bunch of substitute teaching. I'm sure he's got stories when you walk in and you're there, and some of y'all teachers, you understand, you know this. They're going to test the limits, and you need to, right from the get-go, right from the very beginning, you need to lay down the law and let them know, hey, you're messing with someone who is not going to be pushed around, right? That's the idea behind this. They're saying if you give even just an inch, what are these people going to take eventually? They're going to take a whole what? Whole mile. Although they probably didn't use inches and miles. But that's the idea behind this. If you give just a little, they're going to run right over you. You make it clear from the beginning who's the boss. So, as we go and continue, verse 12, Jeroboam, all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king said. And the king answered the people harshly, forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him. He spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy. I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips. I will discipline you with scorpions. And the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs that was what? Brought about by whom? Brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word spoken to Ahijah the Shilonite, or spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And so when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David. And so Israel went to their tents. This is a repeat of statement that had been made back in the days of David when there had been civil strife that was going on as well, when people were rejecting him before finally everything came together. But these lines have been drawn before. The separation of the northern part of Israel, the southern part of Judah, these lines have been drawn. This isn't the first time that this line is created. And this time, though, it's going to be pretty permanent. Yeah, Bruce, Mike's coming to you.
Does that statement, go to your tents, mean go to war? Or exactly what does that mean?
That's a good question. I've never taken it that way. I can see how you would, because the only mention of tents that we've recently had is tents on a battlefield. But I think the picture, though, is just go to your homes. Leave him. We're not going to be part of this coronation process because he's not my king, is kind of the idea. And so we have now the nation of Israel, and whereas they were a united group, from this point on, we're going to draw a line approximately right there or so. And down here, about right here, approximate, just keep in mind, it's all close, relatively, almost close. Round right here or so is where you're going to find Jerusalem. And so this is now going to be known, this northern nation. What are the names that we're going to know it by? All right, Israel. What else? Okay, the northern kingdom. Yeah, but I want, there's two other specific names that it's going to be referred to. No, not the northern. Yeah, still the northern. All right, so the predominant tribe, it's going to be known by the name of the predominant tribe in there, Ephraim, and what else? One more? Samaria. As the capital city is going to end up being the city of Samaria, and so it's going to be kind of known by that. So these are names. When you see these names, it's talking, as Isaac said, about the northern nation. You really just have one name, though, for the southern, and that one's the one Dave said just a second ago. That is Judah in the south. And from this point on, these are going to be two separate entities, which means that we've gone from the time of the kingdom to now what? The divided kingdom. In our timeline here, where we have all of it, you have them in Egypt coming out, and then you have the conquering of the land, and then we had what we called the kingdom when they established a king. What do we call that now? The United Kingdom, right? Now that we are divided, at this point, now we have the divided kingdom. It's kind of like for years, people who went through World War I, what did they call it? The Great War. Why didn't they call it World War I? Yeah, nobody would have ever predicted that people would be stupid enough to bring the world into another one of those things. It was so horrific and devastating that they're like, wow, this is the war to end all wars for 20, 30 years, right? I mean, and then after the second one, they're like, well, the second one is the Second World War, therefore now The other is what? The First World War. So now we have World War I, World War II. Well, now that we have a divided kingdom, we go back and we rename what we were looking at. It is now the time of the United Kingdom. And this brings the United Kingdom in our timeline to its conclusion. The United Kingdom consists of what three kings? All right, Saul and David and Solomon, and works out really well that each of them reigned approximately how many years? 40 years. And so if you just kind of put them into groups of 40, and you start with Saul. Anybody have a date for Saul? A date, time, year? Yeah, 1050 approximately. And there's a lot of translation issues. Isaac said 42 years. There's a whole lot of translation issues with where it says 42 years. I generally just use 40 instead of the 42 that's there. And so that would put David at what time? What's that? For those of you who are math geeks, right? 1010, yes. Very good. I know this is advanced math that we're doing here, which means that Solomon took over when? 970, man. Math geniuses here. So you can kind of split that up so that if he starts at 1050, starts at 1010, starts at 930, it ends in what year? Yeah. You come to 930, and now we are entering into the time of the divided kingdom. All right. So now that the word of the Lord that came through Ahijah to Jeroboam has come about at this point. He is going to be taken, and he is going to be made their king. So verse 17, Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. And the king, Rehoboam, sent Adoram, who was the taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. And so King Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. And therefore all Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. And when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and they called him to the assembly. They made him king over all Israel. And there were none that followed the house of David but the tribe of Judah alone. At this point, Rehoboam is going to do what all monarchs you would think would do. He's going to what? Is he happy to lose all of this? No. So what's he going to do? He's going to start a war. We're going to get it back. He mounts a massive, huge, unbelievable army to go up and fight against them and to bring them back into submission to the house of David. So why does he not succeed? All right, Sean just said because God tells him not to. The word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God, say to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, to the rest of the people, verse 24, thus says the Lord, you shall not go up or fight against your relatives, the people of Israel. Every man return to his home, for this thing is from me. Now, how did chapter 11 basically end? God gave the prophecy, and what did Solomon do? When God gave the prophecy to Jeroboam that he was going to receive this land, what did Solomon do? He tried to kill him. Was he willing to listen to the will of the Lord? No. He was rejecting it. Enter his son, who is sitting in the exact same spot, is he not? He is going to, by force, come to Jeroboam and all the rest of the people and force them to come back under his rule, right? And God sends a prophet. How does Rehoboam respond? Is it the same? No. This says a lot about Rehoboam right here. I know we make a huge, and we should, we're supposed to make a huge deal about how Rehoboam made a foolish choice to start off. And that is legitimate. But I think this says an awful lot about him, that when the prophet came, when he had the overwhelming army, the odds were there, the momentum was there, this is the time to strike, this is the time to do it. They don't have themselves figured out yet. You know, they don't have their government or everything set up. Just get in there before, you know, they're much of anything. And God comes up to him and says, no. I did this. Just go home. And Rehoboam does. I think that is huge. So the end of verse 24, they listened to the word of the Lord and they went home again according to the word of the Lord. Which at this point, you would think that Jeroboam would feel pretty confident, wouldn't you? Everything that God says, has it come true? Yeah. You know, and we probably should have. We didn't read through it, though, because I was focusing on other things. But does anybody know what God promised to Jeroboam? What he would have if he lived like David lived? He would have Isaac said, the exact same enduring dynasty that was promised to David. God said, here it is. I give it to you. You can have it. All you have to do is live like David lived. Walk in David's steps. Serve me as David served me. And you've got it made. That's all that he had to do. You would think right now, wouldn't he be feeling really confident? Right now, the future's so bright, he's walking around with sunglasses on, right? You would think that would be it. Well, you might be wrong, which is what we'll talk about next week. All right, questions or comments? All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good class. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Rich.